August 2010. 41-year-old Kevin Cohen sits in an interview room at the Nassau County District Attorney's Office on Long Island.
You know that you've been arrested and charged with a crime in Nassau County?
Yes.
This long-haired Kevin Cohen is a far cry from the clean-cut attorney he once was.
You knew you were taking money for something that you didn't have.
I'm not trying to suggest that it was right or to justify it at all. I'm just telling you what it was.
But this is the same Kevin Cohen who was accused of stealing nearly $300,000 and leaving a 2-year trail of broken promises and heartache in his wake.
I concocted everything.
How did you choose what to concoct?
I made it up.
Cohen's final strange journey to jail begins a little over a year earlier in March 2009, when he meets Deborah and Milton Josephs of Port Washington, New York. The Josephs, desperate for a child, have been trying to adopt an infant. They placed ads in newspapers and chased leads across the country with no luck.
It just didn't pan out. We got a couple of calls, but this was over a period of about 2 years. And then we were introduced to Kevin Cohen.
Cohen is practically a neighbor. He lives in the upscale community of Roslyn Heights, less than 15 minutes away from the Josephs.
When we went to his house, we sat down with him and he talked about the whole process of what would happen, of how the next few months would pan out.
Relaxed and friendly, the 41-year-old adoption attorney quickly puts the Josephs at ease.
He just came across as a nice, normal guy, a lawyer that was doing this area of law because he'd been adopted himself and wanted to help other couples that wanted to adopt children.
Cohen offers to help the Josephs navigate the complicated and emotional process of adoption, a process that some estimates suggest ends in failure almost 50% of the time.
He is a master manipulator, and he knows how to read people. He knows how to tell people exactly what they want to hear, and he is very good at it.
Today, Cohen has great news. He knows a teenage college student named Erin who wants to give up her baby when it's born.
There was this child in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It's going to be born late August. Even the timing worked out well for us. So we had the summer to prepare for this child.
Cohen shows the Josephs Erin's medical records, and he even offers a sonogram of the infant.
The records he gave us seemed legit. There was a pediatric practice in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania that he gave us with Erin's medical history, and I Googled that and at the very beginning, and it was there.
But there's a catch. To facilitate the adoption, Cohen needs $35,000 deposited into his bank account for medical and legal expenses.
He made sure that the number that he was asking for wasn't an extraordinary amount of money. It wasn't a low amount of money. It was right in the realm of what it would cost to adopt a child.
Cohen tells them if they want the baby, they need to act immediately.
He said we had to sign the papers there and then, that there were other couples that were interested, and I think we wired the money the following day.
A few days later, Cohen comes back with even better news. He's found a second birth mother in Lincoln, Nebraska, who was also willing to give up her child in early August as well.
He presents us with an option, almost as an insurance policy, by saying to us, if Erin didn't work out, then we could have the first option on the baby in Nebraska. Or we could even take both children if we wanted.
This insurance policy is great news, but it costs the Josephs another $30,000, $25,000 for expenses and $5,000 for additional fees.
In the span of 2 weeks, we'd given this man $65,000.
During the summer of 2009, Cohen visits the Josephs' house regularly, offering updates on the pending births of 2 baby girls.
He kept us appraised all the time of the progress of the birth mothers and their pregnancies, and that they'd had another scan and everything was fine.
But in August, Cohen delivers the Josephs some disappointing news. Both birth mothers are experiencing complications, and delivery dates have been pushed back several weeks.
He kept telling us everything was fine. He'd spoken to the doctors, everything was fine. At this point, we trusted him implicitly.
The dates are pushed back again into September. To ensure a smooth adoption, the Josephs decide to split their efforts.
I was going to Nebraska, Deb was going to Pennsylvania. Whichever child was born first, we were going to adopt that child.
Deborah hurries to Pennsylvania and waits anxiously in a hotel room for Cohen's call. But when it finally comes, it's more bad news.
He called her and said that the cord had got wrapped around the baby's neck during the birth, and she couldn't go into the hospital.
Cohen assures them the baby is fine, but that Aaron is in no condition to sign adoption papers. Disappointed, Deborah returns home only to learn the Nebraska adoption, her insurance policy, has also fallen through. The second birth mother has disappeared from the hospital, and Kevin Cohen is nowhere to be found.
He wasn't answering his calls straight away. I think then our suspicions began to get aroused.
Milton does some investigating about the Pennsylvania birth mother. Aaron's name has been redacted with a black marker on all the medical records they have, but her last name is just barely legible.
I held it up to the light and could just about make out O'Malley.
Aaron O'Malley. The Josephs hired a private investigator to dig into Cohen's story about the mysterious Aaron O'Malley. Within days, he confirms that their lawyer has fed them nothing but lies.
His words were, there are red flags popping up everywhere. You need to go and talk to the Nassau County DA.
Up next on American Greed, Cohen parlays his reputation and background to perfect an almost unbelievable scam.
He preyed upon their vulnerability. He used and abused them to get the only thing he cares about, which is money.
Kevin Cohen's descent from respected lawyer to scam artist has been a lifetime process, as Cohen later explains to a court psychiatrist.
I've always admired people who are able to go through a great deal of adversity and to come to grips with it and to rise above it. And I tried to be one of those people, and I tried to do too much.
Born in New York in 1968, Cohen is himself adopted and raised in the exclusive Long Island town of Roslyn Heights.
Kevin was the only child, and he was the child. He had everything, Kevin.
Attorney Matin Imuna has known Cohen since they were 10 years old and has served briefly as his defense lawyer.
Kevin was a friend to everybody. Everybody liked Kevin. He was, in fact, very much involved with the community affairs programs or school activities.
Early success comes easily for Kevin Cohen.
What was your average in high school?
369.
Oh, that's excellent.
I was National Honor Society. Captain of the tennis team, president of the Spanish club.
He receives an Ivy League education, graduating from the University of Pennsylvania in 1990.
He was a really smart man, but everyone agreed Kevin was much more interested in having this perception of being successful than he was in actually doing anything and putting in the work to become successful.
He attends the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law, but in 1993, his mother dies suddenly. This blow leads to bouts of severe depression.
And how did you do in school?
Terribly. My mom got sick in the middle of my first year, and life was never the same after that.
Cohen graduates and passes the bar in the late 90s. But instead of pursuing law, he starts an internet greeting card company. The seed money is provided by his wealthy father, a pattern that has been repeated throughout his life.
Due to the fact that that money was handed to him, without him working that hard for that money, he did not know how to appreciate the dollar the same way you and I would.
Cohen struggles for 7 years, trying unsuccessfully to make the business profitable.
Spent over $250,000 easy in cash on that business, pissed it all away. Several years of my life pissed all away.
Did it ever earn any money?
No.
The business went nowhere, and eventually his father stopped funding him, which upset him.
Cohen dabbles in other questionable businesses with similar results.
He had one get-rich-quick scheme after another, and he was going to license clean-seat toilet covers for public restrooms. He was going to franchise a Australian-Mexican restaurant, but he never had the means to do any of it.
In 2002, his father dies.
And when he passed away, about $3.5 million estate, and I was left with a nice sized trust. And it was set up because he saw that I wasn't right, something wasn't clicking.
Cohen receives a monthly stipend of $2,400. A year later, he marries and continues to live in the Roslyn Heights home.
He wanted everyone to believe that his parents' status was now his status, except he had never done anything to get there.
His wife has a son from a previous marriage, and within a few years, the Cohens have 2 daughters together as well. The expenses of his growing family quickly outpace the $2,400 he receives each month.
He's got 3 kids. They're all well-dressed. He's well-dressed. I mean, they're going out to dinner. They're living a life. He can't foot the bill for any of it.
In 2004, Cohen tries a new business venture. He parlays 2 unsuccessful stints with law firms and rebrands himself an adoption specialist. He opens the not-for-profit company Adoption Annex in a Roslyn, New York loft a few miles from his house.
He convinced a government agency to give him $1 million for what he said would be the best thing to ever happen to adoption.
The Adoption Annex is touted as the first center of its kind in the country, a haven for people looking for adoption support.
It wasn't an agency. It was more of a go there for what the procedure is to adopt a baby, go for counseling there if you're prospective adoptive parents to find out exactly how and what you need to do.
Adoption Annex doesn't broker adoptions, but it does offer Cohen a legitimacy he's never had before.
Adoption Annex made him an adoption expert. He could go anywhere he wanted. People would Google him and come up with the Adoption Annex. Who's more legitimate than that?
Cohen soon finds himself struggling to pay rent, but he hopes that a gift shop and admission fees will keep the Adoption Annex open.
He had talked about franchising Adoption Annex, selling T-shirts and mugs, but the Adoption Annex didn't do anything.
Cohen tries to maintain a facade of success, but the Adoption Annex is hemorrhaging money, and maintaining his affluent lifestyle is draining him every day.
I was several $100,000 in debt on top of what I had spent on the Annex, which was about $750,000.
Cohen has only one real asset left, the house he lives in, which is still controlled by the trustee of his father's estate.
Now he had a $750,000 mortgage he couldn't afford. And even though he couldn't afford any of it, a few months later, he started a $400,000 expansion on this house that he could barely pay the taxes on.
When he's refused a refinancing request in 2008, Cohen forges the trustee's signature on loan documents.
You knew you didn't have access to the funds when you were forging the trustee's signature.
Correct.
The trustee turns him in, and Cohen is arrested on December 12, 2008. He's charged with grand larceny, forgery, and identity theft. Out on bail and sinking deeper in debt, Cohen scrambles to find money.
When this scheme started, he was at the end of his rope. He couldn't borrow from anybody anymore. He had to make money quickly.
Next on American Greed, Cohen begins stalking desperate families who are willing to spend almost anything if it means a chance to adopt a baby.
He was a predator, and he's greedy. All he wanted was money, and he didn't care who he hurt.
Kevin Cohen, who bills himself as a respected adoption attorney, has fallen on hard times.
Friends wouldn't lend him any money. He couldn't borrow from a bank. He couldn't remortgage his house anymore.
He's out of money, and he's out on bail. Recently, he's been arrested for forging a trustee's signature on mortgage documents.
He found himself in a situation of his own making where there was really no way out for him. And that's when he started this scam.
Later, in custody, Cohen will try to explain why. In December 2008, he puts the word out through friends that he knows a woman who wants to give her baby up for adoption.
I made up adoption birth mother situations that didn't exist in order to have people put monies in escrow into my escrow account.
Almost immediately, desperate families reach out to him, including Michael and Elise Romberg in Georgia.
We were introduced to Kevin by a family friend in New York who was in charge of his children at a temple during day school.
Just outside of Atlanta, Michael and Elise Romberg can hardly believe their good luck. Cohen knows a college student named Francesca in Yuma, Arizona, who wants to give up her baby.
He needed a family to adopt this baby, and he needed somebody quickly.
The Rombergs are already very familiar with the adoption process. They are both adopted and have recently adopted 2 daughters as well. Cohen, himself adopted, knows what strings to pull.
He stayed away from what would make us feel worse and kept with what made us feel better, and we were on the hook the whole time.
He also comes with an impressive list of references.
We searched the internet and we found nothing but glowing praises for Kevin Cohen and his adoption advocacy. Found nothing about his arrest record.
The problem is Cohen needs $30,000 immediately, much more than the Rombergs can afford. They tell him there's no way they can come up with that much money that quickly.
He seemed very caring and supportive. And so it didn't seem odd when he called back a couple of days later with a lower price.
Cohen counters and says he only needs $7,500 to cover medical expenses.
He, being desperate for money, was at that point willing to take whatever he could get.
Cohen tells the Rombergs he can get the rest of the money from his not-for-profit company, the Adoption Annex. But he needs the $7,500 right away.
I needed to take a quick loan out because he needed the money the next day.
The Rombergs find a $6,000 loan with a whopping 30% interest rate and scrape together another $1,000. But they still can't meet Cohen's price until their 2 daughters step in to help.
We came up about $500 short, and the kids definitely came forward and said, just take it, it's yours. That was a wonderful moment.
Kevin knew that. They told Kevin that, and he still took the money.
The final check they write is actually paid to the landlord of the building that houses Adoption Annex.
This is a check that we sent in Kevin Cohen's name to East Coast Abstract, which we assumed was an escrow house because that's what they did. It later turned out to be his landlord, and this money was to help him pay his back rent.
Cohen shows the Rombergs detailed medical records for the supposed birth mother, Francesca. And then he offers the one document that always seems to seal the deal.
Well, when I saw the sonogram, that's my baby. This is my baby. This is a real live, we'll see you in a couple months.
Though he won't reveal Francesca's last name, Cohen does give the Rombergs plenty of background information about her.
She was a dancer. She was not planning on having a child, and she wanted to complete dance school.
Knowing their sedan is too small for 3 kids, the Rombergs buy a minivan. It's just another expense as they prepare for the arrival of their new baby.
You have to have the onesies, you have to have receiving blankets, you have to have formula and bottles.
When everything was said and done, I think we'd put out somewhere close to $50,000.
About a month before the delivery date, Cohen sends them a medical report with more good news.
This is an email from Kevin Cohen stating it's a girl and how big she is and how much she weighs at this point.
In May 2009, the Rombergs tell Cohen they plan to come to Yuma for the birth of the baby they've decided to name Sylvia Ann.
At that point, he told us that it's probably not the best idea to go until the baby's born, because you never can tell what's going to happen.
The Rombergs ignore his advice. They pile into their new van, making the 2,000-mile trek across the South to Yuma. They have no way of knowing that Cohen has painted himself into a corner. At least 3 other families are converging on Yuma, all thinking they are going to adopt the same baby girl.
We sort of set up right in front of the hospital saying our baby's in there somewhere. And, you know, there could have been 4 other families doing the same exact thing. But we didn't know it at the time.
To buy time, Cohen tells the Rombergs the birth father has changed his mind and decided to keep the baby.
He was very hopeful, but not encouraging, and no guarantees, obviously, that the father would come around in a couple of weeks.
Then, to further placate them, Cohen tells the Rombergs of a woman named Erin in Pennsylvania who might soon be willing to give up her baby.
We actually drove home in a fairly good mood after all that, because he had dangled that in front of us and basically taken all the negative possible out of the first adoption attempt.
Cohen dodges a bullet. None of the families converging on Yuma have realized his betrayal.
He just continued as normal. He talked his way out of that one, and he'll talk his way out of the next one.
The Rombergs speak periodically with Cohen over the coming months, but his updates about Erin are vague.
I had requested receipts and accounting at this point for the entire process because I was getting a little fed up with the lack of information. And he was never forthcoming with any of those items.
Eventually, the calls and emails stop. Next on American Greed, Cohen moves on, and he's looking to steal more money, one broken promise at a time.
He didn't care who he hurt, he didn't care who he ran over, or what dreams he shattered or hearts he broke. He just wanted money, and that's disgusting.
Kevin Cohen, a self-described adoption specialist, runs his first series of adoption scams in December 2008. By the summer of 2009, the attorney finds himself buried under a mounting pile of debt and plagued with bouts of depression.
The adoption annex was bleeding him. I believe that the construction of his house was bleeding him. His mental state, just all 3 of them are all at the same time.
In fact, the adoption annex, Cohen's much-hyped adoption advocacy center, has been unable to pay rent for months. Like his previous failed business ventures, Cohen is forced to quietly shutter the annex, still owing his landlord $40,000. Despite his debt, Cohen continues to overextend himself, maintaining the pretense of upper-middle-class success.
He's like over $1 million in debt, most of which is his personal expenses. He's driving around in Escalades that he can't afford. That summer, he built a $32,000 driveway on this house he couldn't afford.
And to pay for it all, he's scamming money from desperate families looking to adopt by promising them babies who don't exist.
I was trying to go in to get myself out of the hole that I had put myself into throughout all those years of spending 7 figures when he didn't have it to easily spend.
Using his credentials as an adoption specialist, Cohen quickly realizes there is an almost limitless pool of families to steal from.
He had victims that were poor. He had victims that were same-sex couples. He had victims that were single moms. There was no prejudice involved at all. He just ran the gamut.
Unlike a lot of financial schemes, these people weren't looking for money. They weren't looking for a return on an investment. They just wanted a baby. They wanted a family. And he preyed upon that.
The scam he runs is simple. To earn people's trust, he approaches his targets indirectly.
You told friends what before they
Because I've access to a situation.
Mm-hmm.
If you know anybody.
That you had access to a baby.
Yes.
He said the same thing to at least 20 people. And they started talking to people they knew. And every one of his victims referred to him by someone who knew someone who said, you can trust Kevin Cohen.
The would-be parents are told the money they give him has been placed in escrow to pay for medical costs and other expenses. Cohen's attention to details sells the scam well.
He produced expense sheets breaking down birth mother expenses. He took out phone numbers in the name of fictitious birth mothers and then billed showing phone calls between him and the birth mothers, all of which was just completely made up and fictitious.
To support his stories, he provides medical records to prove the birth mother is healthy.
Did she ask for any doctor's report?
Yeah, I doctor some up.
He Googles legitimate doctors and adds their forged signatures to his bogus medical records.
So he made sure that if anybody was going to check on who this doctor was, that they were very reputable.
He provides a sonogram of the baby.
Sometimes he gave people it in black and white. Sometimes he gave it to them in color. Sometimes he split it and gave them one picture on one date and the other picture on the other date.
But even the sonogram is yet another lie.
There was one sonogram, and he manipulated it however he wanted. He would put a different birth mother's name on it, a different testing date on it, a different hospital date on it, but it was all the same picture.
When due dates approach, Cohen invents complications that invariably derail the adoption process.
Something would happen. Either the birth mother changed her mind, the father was now in the picture, but I'm so sorry, this has never happened to me before. I'm so sorry, we will find you a baby.
Before it is over, he's duped at least 13 families across the country.
At the end, he was kind of just on a mission to get as much money as possible.
In the fall of 2009, his story threatens to unravel when two disappointed families run out of patience with his broken promises.
He had two clients, one in New York and one in Florida, who were at their wits' end. And they were both threatening to go to the police if he didn't give them back all the money that they had given him.
One Florida family, who paid Cohen $30,000, demands he open his books and explain where the money went.
Accused him of trying to steal money from them. He was all apologetic, told them it was a big misunderstanding.
The couple calls Cohen's bank and learns there's no money in their escrow account.
The Florida couple then called Kevin Cohen, and he said, that's impossible. I'll have the bank manager call you right back.
Cohen makes a desperate and bold attempt to throw them off the scent once and for all. On September 22nd, he calmly walks into his local Bank of America. Shown here on security cameras, he asks to use a phone.
He pretended to be the bank manager, vouched for Kevin Cohen, said he has sufficient funds in his account.
But his plan has a flaw. When the couple calls back minutes later to ask a question, they learn the manager they think they spoke to is actually out of the country. Furious with Cohen, the family demands their money back.
He couldn't give him that, so then he literally got in touch with a friend of his and found a couple that were vacationing in Israel that were looking to adopt a child, but he needed the money that day. They had to wire him $40,000.
That $40,000, stolen from yet another family, buys Cohen some time. But questions are being asked, and he's scrambling to hide the damage he's done.
That week, he's at Kinko's, running off photocopies, creating packets. He's impersonating the bank manager. His house of cards is just coming down.
Coming up, the walls are closing in, and Cohen makes a final series of frantic phone calls to steal more money with empty promises.
You feel violated. You feel stupid. It was devastating. I felt like somebody punched me in the stomach.
To read more transcripts of Kevin Cohen's psychiatric interview, visit AmericanGreed.cnbc.com. We'll be right back. Ben and Bridget Vode of Long Island have almost forgotten they already have a history with Kevin Cohen. In 2006, he represented the guardians of a baby they tried unsuccessfully to adopt.
Kevin Cohen was the attorney for the adoption, and not that anything Kevin did, at least not that we're aware of, but the guardian decided to keep the baby themselves.
For 3 years, the Vodes lose touch with Cohen. They don't know he's been arrested for trying to steal his late father's house from his trust fund, or that he's fallen on hard times. But Cohen remembers them.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. He preyed upon us specifically.
Cohen reaches out to them in September 2009.
When he called, it was kind of out of the blue, and one asked us if we were still looking to adopt a child, if that was something that we were even interested in. And we were.
He says he knows a Pennsylvania college student named Erin O'Malley, who's willing to give up her child for $22,500.
He said, I need the money up front right away so I can assure the birth mother that you're legitimate, you're serious, and you want to go forward with this adoption.
Cohen's in a hurry. Later that day, he shows up at the Votes house.
He had Erin O'Malley's medical records showing that she was up to date and she was healthy. Records from an OBGYN stating that the baby was healthy.
And then the one, the trump card was
the sonogram. You can see the baby's feet. Little head.
By now, Cohen has run this scam at least 12 times. He knows the routine.
everything that he had looked legitimate. The sonogram had the name of the birth mother on the bottom. It had the date. It had the time. I mean, so it looked very, very real.
Cohen even offers them an out if something goes wrong.
He gave us a document stating that any money that we put forward, if an adoption did not take place, we would be refunded fully by him and or the adoption annex that he was representing.
That night, an excited Cohen calls with more good news.
He said, "Oh, would you be interested in seeing a picture of Erin?" And I said, "Of course I would." Within an hour, he forwarded me a picture of a really pretty girl.
The Votes quickly find a loan with a 13.5% interest rate, but they'd like to shop around for a better deal. Cohen doesn't want to wait, and he offers his own financial twist to keep things moving.
He said that the adoption annex would be willing to make up the difference if we could guarantee and sign documents right now.
What the Votes don't know is that Adoption Annex has ceased to exist nearly a year earlier. Their focus is about finally adding a baby to their family.
It was very easy for him to dangle a baby in front of you because you desperately wanted that child. You know, there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of yearning involved in wanting a child.
Within 2 days, the Votes have deposited the $22,500 into Cohen's Bank of America account.
I got a final call from him saying everything's taken care of, no problem. We'll talk to you in the next couple days. And that was the last I've ever had any correspondence with him.
What they also don't know is Cohen is under enormous pressure to steal more money.
He could have very easily walked away from this, but in the end, it was his greed that got him.
He's currently shopping Erin O'Malley's alleged medical records to at least 2 other families, including Deborah and Milton Josephs. Also on Long Island, the Josephs have been waiting months for Cohen to follow through on the 2 separate adoptions he's promised them.
Looking back at that summer, the pieces of the jigsaw just didn't fit into place.
The Josephs have paid Cohen $65,000 to facilitate adoptions in Pennsylvania and Nebraska. But Cohen says the Nebraska mother has disappeared, and Erin in Pennsylvania is refusing to sign the adoption paperwork.
I think then our suspicions began to get aroused. You know, what's going on here? Why is this not working?
Milton calls the Pennsylvania hospital where Erin is supposedly staying.
He said, "Can I speak to Erin O'Malley, please?" They said, "We've got no record of any Erin O'Malley here," which I thought was very strange.
Milton then calls the Nebraska hospital only to learn there wasn't a pregnant woman there either. The Josephs take their suspicions to Nassau County Assistant District Attorney Karen Bennett and Chief Investigator Chuck Rabondo.
They had a letter from a doctor. They had their retainer agreement, their attestation of due diligence.
Phone calls to the hospital confirm there is no pregnant Erin O'Malley in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So how did Cohen come up with the name of this phantom mother? Investigators will later learn the name O'Malley has particular and twisted significance to Kevin Cohen.
I understand that you were adopted as a youngster. Do you know anything about your birth parents?
Nothing. I just know my birth mother's name. That's it.
Uh-huh. And what was her name?
Nancy O'Malley.
O'Malley was his real birth mother's name, maiden name. It was a little bit of a shocker.
Up next, investigators find out just how much damage Cohen has created in 2 years and how much hope he has turned to heartache.
It was probably the worst case I've ever investigated, being that it was so repulsive on how he played on these families' emotions. I've never seen anything like this before.
Deborah and Milton Josephs, desperate to adopt a child, have given $65,000 to attorney Kevin Cohen. In return, he's given them lies and distractions.
He saw us as a cash cow, I think, and he preyed on our emotions.
Frustrated, they've contacted the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. Cohen's been running his scam for more than 2 years. It takes investigators less than 9 days to collect enough evidence to realize they have a bizarre case of fraud on their hands.
We spoke to anyone that we could speak to who knew him. We did a full financial investigation on him, and everyone we spoke to basically told us the same story.
On September 25th, 2009, police arrest Kevin Cohen outside his home.
The day he was arrested, he looked every bit the part that he was playing. He looked like the Ivy League grad who belonged in the large house in Roslyn.
Search warrants reveal Cohen has every intention to expand his operation.
We found that he had just gone to Kinko's a few days before and made a stack of color sonograms so that he could give them out to his next victims. And he acknowledged that the only reason this scam stopped was because he was arrested.
For Benjamin and Bridget Vogt, it is an abrupt end to a whirlwind week. Only 4 days earlier, they gave Cohen more than $22,000.
I was angry. I was angry about everything that was going on. How could someone come into my home, meet with my family, and steal money from us like that? Not only the money, but everything emotionally that he stole from me and my wife.
Michael and Elise Romberg, who have been waiting 8 months for a baby, are stunned to learn of Cohen's betrayal.
It really is incredible that anyone would do this. And, you know, had he stabbed me in the heart, it would have been less cruel.
Before it's over, 13 couples come forward claiming they've been scammed by Cohen during the past 2 years. All told, he stole nearly $300,000.
Literally, almost every one of the victims said, I can't even believe that somebody could be that cruel to do something like this.
Speaking with the court psychiatrist, Cohen defends his actions, claiming he's simply been misunderstood.
There was never a question in my mind to any of these people that I was not going to give them their money back.
He claims his depression has become bipolar disorder, and he is not responsible for his erratic behavior.
It's everyone else's fault that no one diagnosed him properly earlier. Everyone should have seen that he's been mentally ill for a long time, and no one did anything to help him. So poor Kevin, poor Kevin, poor Kevin.
In fact, Cohen seems eager to absolve himself of all blame.
You don't look particularly sad in talking about what you did. I mean, sometimes...
Frankly, I've forgiven myself.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
The courts are not so forgiving. Kevin Cohen is soon indicted on 69 counts of larceny, fraud, and forgery. Cohen, who has never been a trial lawyer, decides to represent himself.
As with everything else, Kevin believes that he's smarter than everyone else and decided that no one could represent Kevin Cohen as well as Kevin Cohen.
He faces 92 years in jail.
To this day, I don't believe that Kevin had the mental state to stand trial and try the case himself.
By the time trial begins, Cohen has undergone a startling transformation. He no longer looks like the clean-cut suburban lawyer he once was. Now his hair is long and unkempt, and he goes days without showering.
That's what this jury saw. They saw a crazy-looking person who was saying, I'm crazy.
To counter Cohen's appearance, prosecutors showed jurors photos of what he looked like only months before.
And you could hear a gasp. And then everyone just looked at the picture and looked at him, and looked at the picture and looked at him. And they started to get it, that that's the person that all of these people trusted, not the guy sitting here now.
During trial, he's asked by prosecutors to justify the pain he's caused.
And his response was that he calculated in his mind the amount of pain and suffering that his actions would cause them. But then he rationalized this to himself by saying, but these things happen in adoption all the time, and they would get over it.
The trial lasts 4 weeks. After 7 hours of deliberations, the jury returns its verdict.
Guilty, 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 guilty.
It was just a great feeling to hear guilty every single count.
And interestingly, while the foreman of the jury was reading the guilty verdict, he couldn't care less, he wasn't paying attention.
On December 7, 2010, Kevin Cohen is sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Though broke, he's also ordered to return the $296,000 he stole. Fortunately, the families he's scammed are able to take advantage of a New York lawyers fund that makes partial restitution to victims of attorney fraud.
So the lawyers fund reimbursed most of the victims only for the amount of money that they had paid Cohen, not for what they spent on cribs and all of that.
Out of the 65, we got the 60 back.
We were reimbursed simply the amount that we paid directly to him for services or for fees for the mother. And that is all. All the other expenses, they're gone. We'll never get those back.
The victims of Kevin Cohen have learned a harsh lesson about greed, and that some thieves steal more than just money.
It was all a scam, and they were devastated. And he can sit there and say, these things happen, they'll get over it. They're not over it. I don't know how you get over that.
Kevin Cohen is a thief of dreams and of money and of hearts. And that's all he'll ever be to me now.
Have been trying to adopt an infant. They placed ads in newspapers and chased leads across the country with no luck.
It just didn't pan out. We got a couple of calls, but this was over a period of about 2 years. And then we were introduced to Kevin Cohen.
Cohen is practically a neighbor. He lives in the upscale community of Roslyn Heights, less than 15 minutes away from the Josephs.
When we went to his house, we sat down with him and he talked about the whole process of what would happen, of how the next few months would pan out.
Relaxed and friendly, the 41-year-old adoption attorney quickly puts the Josephs at ease.
He just came across as a nice, normal guy, a lawyer that was doing this area of law because he'd been adopted himself and wanted to help other couples that wanted to adopt children.
Cohen offers to help the Josephs navigate the complicated and emotional process of adoption, a process that some estimates suggest ends in failure almost 50% of the time.
He's a master manipulator.
Maybe they need to act immediately.
He said we had to sign the papers there and then, that there were other couples that were interested, and I think we wired the money the following day.
A few days later, Cohen comes back with even better news. He's found a second birth mother in Lincoln, Nebraska, who was also willing to give up her child in early August as well.
He presents us with an option, almost as an insurance policy, by saying to us, if Erin didn't work out, then we could have the first option on the baby in Nebraska. Or we could even take both children if we wanted.
This insurance policy is great news, but it costs the Josephs another $30,000, $25,000 for expenses and $5,000 for additional fees.
In the span of 2 weeks, we'd given this man $65,000.
During the summer of 2009, Cohen visits the Josephs' house regularly, offering updates on the pending births of 2 baby girls.
He kept us appraised all the time of the progress of the birth mothers and their pregnancies, and that they'd had another scan and everything was fine.
But in August, Cohen delivers the Josephs some disappointing news. Both birth mothers are experiencing complications, and delivery dates have been pushed back several weeks.
He kept telling us everything was fine. He'd spoken to the doctors, everything was fine. At this point, we trusted him implicitly.
The dates are pushed back again into September. To ensure a smooth adoption, the Josephs decide to split their efforts.
I was going to Nebraska, Deb was going to Pennsylvania. Whichever child was born first, we were going to adopt that child.
Deborah hurries to Pennsylvania and waits anxiously in a hotel room for Cohen's call. But when it finally comes, it's more bad news.
He called her and said that the cord had got wrapped around the baby's neck during the birth, and she couldn't go into the hospital.
Cohen assures them the baby is fine, but that Erin is in no condition to sign adoption papers. Disappointed, Deborah returns home only to learn the Nebraska adoption, August 2010. 41-year-old Kevin Cohen sits in an interview room at the Nassau County District Attorney's Office on Long Island.
You know that you've been arrested and charged with a crime in Nassau County?
Yes.
This long-haired Kevin Cohen is a far cry from the clean-cut attorney he once was.
You knew you were taking money for something that you didn't have.
I'm not trying to suggest that it was right or to justify it at all. I'm just telling you what it was.
But this is the same Kevin Cohen who was accused of stealing nearly $300,000 and leaving a 2-year trail of broken promises and heartache in his wake.
I concocted everything.
How did you choose what to concoct?
I made it up.
Cohen's final strange journey to jail begins a little over a year earlier in March 2009, when he meets Deborah and Milton Josephs of Port Washington, New York. The Josephs, desperate for a child.
And he knows how to read people. He knows how to tell people exactly what they want to hear. And he is very good at it.
Today, Cohen has great news. He knows a teenage college student named Erin who wants to give up her baby when it's born.
There was this child in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It was going to be born late August. Even the timing worked out well for us. So we had the summer to prepare for this child.
Cohen shows the Josephs Erin's medical records, and he even offers a sonogram of the infant.
The records he gave us seemed legit. There was a pediatric practice in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania that he gave us with Erin's medical history, and I Googled that and at the very beginning, and it was there.
But there's a catch. To facilitate the adoption, Cohen needs $35,000 deposited into his bank account for medical and legal expenses.
He made sure that the number that he was asking for wasn't an extraordinary amount of money. It wasn't a low amount of money. It was right in the realm of what it would cost to adopt a child.
Cohen tells them if they want the baby,